Todd Rogers is a behavioral scientist and professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. His work is especially focused on the science of effective communication. His research harnesses insights about human behavior to develop scalable interventions that improve social welfare. As an overarching goal, he is committed to ensuring that behavioral policy research is implemented widely and with fidelity. This has led to his co-founding two social enterprises. He was founding executive director of the Analyst Institute, which uses behavioral science insights and methods to improve voter communications. He is co-founder of Everyday Labs, which takes an asset-based view of families to increase student attendance. He is faculty director of the Harvard Behavioral Insights Group and the Students' Social Support R&D Lab. He is faculty chair of the Behavioral Insights and Public Policy Executive Education Program. He is also senior scientist at Ideas 42 and academic advisor at the UK's Behavioral Insights team. He received a PhD jointly from Harvard's Department of Psychology and Harvard Business School and received a BA from Williams College, double majoring in religion and psychology. Professor Rogers, thank you so much for joining us today onto this important topic. Over to you.
Thanks for that introduction, Taylor, and thanks to the HKS Exec Ed team for organizing this. I want to, and thank you all for attending. I want to begin by describing a little bit of background about how we get here, from my work. As Taylor was describing, I helped start and led an organization in Washington, D.C. called the Analyst Institute, which mostly focused on voter communications, which is with a heavy focus on get out the vote, on increasing voter turnout. And then when I returned to Harvard as a faculty member 10 years ago, shifted entirely to how do we use the same kind of behavioral science communications tools to helping families help kids outside of school, with a special focus on increasing student attendance. And in the process, spun out this organization, Everyday Labs, which is independent of my role here. And during that time, I did a lot of research in schools. And then when the pandemic hit, a lot of the schools research was paused. But Everyday Labs continued helping school districts around the country communicate to families, and with a focus on increasing attendance. But because of the pandemic, communicating about where to pick up food, communicating about where to pick up computers, testing, school reopening plans, school closing plans, and other pandemic-related things. And so I spent a lot of time in the beginning of the pandemic and until now working with school district leaders, districts the size of 10,000 students to hundreds of thousands of students, working on how to communicate effectively to really busy people who are overwhelmed by what's happening in the world. And I am especially focused on communicating with the most vulnerable families who have the most chaos brought on as a result of this pandemic. And in the process, my longtime collaborator, Jessica Lasky-Fink at Berkeley, and I started talking about, well, what are the principles of effectively communicating to busy people? And so we started doing research on it. We started pulling together other things. And that's where we are with this. I'm working on a book on this topic with Jessica. And so any good examples that you all have of really great communications, or even better, really terrible communications, please email them to me. I'll ask you at the end of this also for that. So in advance of this session, we did a survey and a bunch of you filled out open-ended, how do you do email? How do you go through email? And I'm going to rip out a couple of quotes about the process you go through to go through email. I prioritize starting with those emails that consume the least time. That was one of you. I quickly, including more quickly. So the answer to the question, how do you do email? I think the first word was just quickly. That's the answer. But then including even more quickly, deleting longer emails without readily evident relevance to me. And so I'm going to launch a survey and ask you all how you all do email. So here we go. I launched the survey. I believe this is working. Taylor, can you? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So there's 3 questions. Would you say that you try to get through email as quickly as possible or slowly and carefully? Would you say there's plenty of time in the day or not enough time in the day? Have you ever sent a message to someone where it was important to you that they respond quickly and they did not respond quickly? right, we'll give it 10 more seconds. All right, so we will end the poll and I will show the results, which should not surprise anyone. The results are, would you say that you try to get through email as quickly as possible or slowly and carefully? So 73% of you are like me and try to get through it as quickly as possible. This is also like vast majority of people we survey when we've done these studies. Would you say there's plenty of time in the day or not enough time? I want to live in the world where 18% of you are in, where there's plenty of time, but 82% of you say not enough time in the day. And then finally, have you ever sent a message to someone where it was important to you that they respond quickly and they did not? 96% of you shared my experience of sending communications to people where I need them to respond and they have not responded quickly enough. I'm kind of curious about the lived experience of the other 4%, but for now, we're going to focus on how do we get people to respond to our communications? A sort of mantra that I use when I'm writing communications is that nobody cares about my email as much as I do, and everyone is busier than me. That's the assumption I have when I'm trying to communicate with people. But these surveys that we just looked at, these survey results, that's sort of the motivating problem that that managers, leaders, and individuals are wrestling with, that I'm trying to work on this work. So why don't you respond to my emails or texts? Too many messages. So there's research that Americans on average receive over 100 cell phone text messages a day. Obviously, it's skewed towards younger people, and over 100 emails per day. There's a lot of messages. There's too little time. The majority of Americans say there's not enough time. I think literacy is an important thing to consider when we're communicating to people. In addition to writing that is written at a high reading level being difficult to read, there's a big chunk of Americans for whom reading English at a high level is a challenge. So something on the order of 20 to 25% of heads of households in the US have below basic literacy, according to the census. 20% of heads of household in the US speak a native language other than English at home. So all of that is, the easier things are to understand, the more effective is the direction we're going to be going. And then people have limited attention and selective attention. They skim. They manage their attention and allocate it so they don't read linearly necessarily. These are just sort of high level background information for us. So I'm very focused on the consequences of poorly written messages being that people either don't read them or they don't act on them. And we've all experienced this. 96% of us have experienced this, where we send messages and they are either not read or not responded to sufficiently. But my wife has pushed me in this direction of thinking hard about it, which is, if I could have reduced the time required to read my message from 1 minute to 30 seconds, I will have done a kind act to the reader. It is unkind to burden the reader with extra time because you are unwilling to edit it. And so I imagine you're a manager or a school district leader or a governmental leader or anyone communicating to a large group of people. If it takes you 10 minutes to edit something down in half and save a minute for the reader, if there are more than 10 readers, you are saving net time. You are imposing a welfare cost on other people by not making it easy to understand and consume. And in this way, you're wasting people's time and being unkind to people by not writing the most effective communications. In fact, one of the respondents on the session filling out the survey said, lengthy emails in today's work environment are disrespectful of the reader. In the work environment, I can receive over 100 emails in one day. And then this person goes on to talk about why it's so important that people write concisely, which is going to lead to our first principle. We're going to have 5 total principles of effective communication. The first is use fewer words. Blaise Pascal, a French philosopher, centuries ago, wrote in a letter to a friend, "I am writing you a long letter because I don't have time to write a short one." I love this because it is an acknowledgement that this could, if with more editing, it could have been shorter. But I also love it because the sentence is terrible, because the sentence could have been shorter if he had had more time to rewrite it. So Jessica and I rewrote it. With more time, I would have written a shorter letter. And in the process, we cut almost half the words from Blaise Pascal's sentence. So he's illustrating that he would have written a shorter letter if he'd had more time by writing a long sentence saying that much. I'm going to show a bunch of randomized experiments that we have done on this topic. And this is just a sampling of them because we have done tons. So I did a survey in August of 7,000 school board members. We sent them by email. And I wrote this message saying, I'm a Harvard professor. I want to learn about how you guys are dealing with the pandemic and school reopening and so on. Please fill out this survey. And then in a different, I split the group in half. 3,500 got that one. 3,500 got a shortened one. Less than half as many words. And basically I just cut, as you can see, just straight cut all the middle words. And I had people predict, a big group of a few hundred people predict which of these two messages would have higher response rate. And 69% of people thought that the original one, because it had more content and was more compelling, would lead to a greater response rate. But what actually happened was the shorter one almost doubled response rates, increased response rates by 78%. I'm going to show you a bunch that have exactly this pattern. Everyday Labs, yeah, the organization I talked about that we started to help school districts reduce absenteeism. It's not Harvard related, but I did a webinar with them and a bunch of really inspiring school district leaders. And we had over 1,000 attendees. It was a very big webinar. And they sent this promotional email about closing the attendance gap. It had 190 words. And just for fun, I asked them, what if we cut almost everything except the list of attendees? And we do the shortened one from 190 words to 75 words. Again, I then asked a few hundred people to predict which one would be more effective at increasing registrations for the webinar. And 93% of people, almost everybody, thought the longer one, because it has all this content about why absenteeism is important, about the urgency of our moment, about COVID-19. They read it, they looked at the two of them. They thought the longer one would be more effective. But the shorter one was 3 times more effective. It was 200%, 3 times as effective, 200% more effective. So like for every 1 person who registered in the long one, we had 3 in the shortened one. Using fewer words. This is just a sampling. We've done it with text messages. We've done it with other kinds of content. Using fewer words is a way to get people to be more likely to read your content and respond to it. So I used to, when I hire people at the Analyst Institute or at Harvard or at Everyday Labs, the first like rule in our communication has always been no email should be more than 4 sentences. Everything else should be below the fold. And the idea is that no one's job is to respond to our emails. We're always trying to pitch like school districts or political campaigns or environmental organizations to work with us. And we always want them to read it and understand what we're asking them. So I'm not advocating for a 4-sentence rule. I'm just saying cutting as many words as possible is better. That's principle number 1. Principle number 2, decrease reading level. There is a really nice measure of grade level reading called the Flesch-Kincaid reading score. You can do it on Microsoft Word, you can do it in Google Docs, you can do it on Google on the internet. But what it basically measures is the number of syllables per word and the number of words per sentence and the complexity of your sentences. So these are like the 3 inputs into what's reading level. And the big takeaway of what I'm going to advocate here, reduce reading level. Make it easier for people to read. They can read more quickly and you make it more accessible to more people. So here is a way of sort of thinking about what different reading levels are. So like a 4th grade reading level is a nursery rhyme. A 5th grade reading level, 20% of the US population is at 5th grade or below. 6th grade comic strips. High school, the average US reading level is high school reading. USA Today, 10th grade, and so on. And for those of you who read The Economist, congratulations, it's a very high reading level. But I did, so here's a randomized experiment again that we did on this topic now. So working with Kamala Harris when she was the Attorney General in California, she was very interested in reducing absenteeism in California. And so in the state of California, there is a law that almost every US state has, which is that when a kid is absent or late 3 days total, they are required to get a notice of truancy, a notification alerting their families that they are meet some standard of truancy. And this is written at a at a 10th grade reading level, 350 words. And just for fun, I'm going to read the first sentence because it's kind of amazing. This is going to a family of a kid who's missed a lot of school, and it's state mandated, written by lawyers in Sacramento. California Education Code Section 48260 provides that a pupil subject to compulsory full-time education or to compulsory continuate, it's clearly not written for humans. It's written for lawyers. And so working with Jessica, a collaborator at Brown named Carly Robinson, and Hetty Chang, who's an alum of the Kennedy School and runs an amazing organization called Attendance Works, we reduced the reading level required from 10th grade to 5th grade. We cut the words by more than half. And this is why the Attorney General's office was needed, was that we still had to meet state criteria, state like legislation about conveying the relevant information. We basically compressed the hard to read stuff that was mandated down here. And then we made this 15-point font, 150 words. And then with a large school district in California, we sent to 131,000 families who were eligible for this letter, either a version of the standard letter or versions of the modified letter. And the modified letter we found was 40% more effective than the standard letter at reducing absenteeism in the next 30 days. So just lowering the grade level, reducing the words, but we really focus here on lowering the grade level. And this has now become the state, it's in the process of becoming the state standard in California and a bunch of other states. So the second principle, first, use fewer words. Second, decrease reading level. Everybody's busy. And high reading level is not accessible to everybody. And now format to direct attention. This is the third principle. What I mean by that is use formatting to direct people to the thing you want them to do. So Everyday Labs works with school districts using hard copy mail and text message and lots of modalities to reduce absenteeism. And with one school district this summer, they were doing texting to get people to fill out a survey about what they need for succeeding in school. And so thanks for participating in summer school. Please answer this 1-minute survey to help us improve your program. And then it's a survey. So what we suggested was, what if you split it in half? So there's 2 messages, and basically the structure of the text message formatting reinforces that we would like the survey to be highlighted. This is just an unnecessary sentence with regards to the survey. This is just thank you for being a part of the summer program. And then we just separate out so that we draw special attention to the survey. And we increased response rate, survey completion by 15%. 22,000, almost 23,000 families. I'm going to show you other examples of this too, but the idea here is formatting should reinforce the purpose and realize that formatting is used as a heuristic by readers to guide attention to what the writer thinks is important. So formatting can direct attention. I Googled what is the most boring paragraph ever written. Oh, no, this is not it. Sorry, whoever wrote this is not that paragraph, but it is a paragraph that a school district sent out to its students about testing. And what I want to show here is that formatting can be useful when it is used judiciously. So if everything is highlighted, nothing is spotlighted. And the point of this is to show that highlighting lots of things, and I'm sure you've received emails or communications where everything is bolded and there's crazy amount of color and highlighting and bullets and whatever. It turns out that just jams a reader's ability to infer what exactly is the goal of the communication. If everything is highlighted, nothing is spotlighted. But I might ask, can you think of any unintended consequences of highlighting some content as opposed to others? So think to yourself, I'm not going to, because of my own ineptitude with Zoom, I'm not going to read the answer. If you want to post it in the chat, that's fine. But think, what would be an unintended consequence of highlighting some content as opposed to other content? And I will show you one of those consequences. So we ran a study where we had people read this 5 paragraph thing about a college. And buried in the fourth paragraph is a sentence that says, on the next question, choose answer 3 and you'll get a bonus amount of money. Okay, so it's buried. Now imagine you're a reader. It's just buried in that paragraph. But if you're reading the whole thing, you'll know that and you'll get extra money. So we ran a study where one group just saw that, and we saw what percent of people read the whole thing closely enough to get down to that spot. This is sort of inspired by my kids when they were in second grade in the Cambridge public schools. There was a teacher, a parent liaison in the school, who every week sent a 7-page newsletter home to the parents. And I approached her at one point and said, what if on page 6, you put in the fourth paragraph a sentence saying, Todd Rogers will pay you $20 if you're reading this sentence. And that way you can see that you don't need to be writing this. You should be reallocating your time to other things. She never agreed to do it. I'm kind of glad, because I think once people found out, then I would have been paying a lot of people. But that's what this is inspired by. Turns out 48% of people read this 5-paragraph thing closely enough to receive a bonus. In another condition, we highlight that sentence for them, right? Which is they're reading it, and we, the benevolent highlighter, are communicating this is the important information. And there, 85% receive the bonus. Not surprising. When you highlight things, people are more likely to read them. But here's the more subtle part. What happens when you highlight something else? So again, the heuristic that people are using is that the highlighter is benevolent. The highlighter is the writer is using highlighting to highlight the most important information. And I, as someone with limited time, limited reading, limited attention, and really motivated to skim, I'm going to skim and read that. And so we find what happens to the percent of people reading and clicking on the bonus money if we highlight something else. And we find is that highlighting something else actually decreases their reading of the information that we are most interested in. I'm going to repeat this. The point here is compare 39% to 48%. So highlighting a sentence other than the focal sentence saying, when you get to the next page, click on a certain button, we'll pay you extra money. Highlighting a different sentence decreases their likelihood of reading the sentence that we're interested in. So, but highlighting the key information makes them much more likely, almost doubles it. The point is use formatting to direct attention. And you need to be really mindful that people are skimming content. And when you highlight the wrong content, you're crowding out other content. But if you're not highlighting anything at all, highlighting is a very effective way of getting people to the key information. Use fewer words, decrease reading level, direct attention with formatting. Okay, the fourth one is make key information obvious and noticeable. So think subject line, think first couple sentences, think very end of the message, but basically realize that people are jumping around trying to figure out what the point is. So here is an absolute favorite study of mine. I didn't do it. The Alyssa Fishbane and team did this with the New York City Police Department. And what they did was, this is a court summons. When someone gets a summons, they get this written up. And this is often when this was done in 2015. This paper was published in Science just a few months ago. It's fantastic. But what they do is when someone gets issued a summons by a police officer at the time that this was being done, this is the only communication they get about the summons and their need to appear in criminal court. And so what the point of what I think is most important here is when we're trying to figure out what the point of this is and what the key information is and make that obvious. When you look at this, it is not at all clear what this document is, or if you're supposed to appear in criminal court, where it is or when you're supposed to do it. I challenge you to look at this and try to skim it and figure out, if you've never received this before, what is the point of this and what are we supposed to do? Over half of people who receive these fail to appear at court, which has dramatic downstream consequences on cost and potential downstream contact with law enforcement. So what they do is they just rewrite it, making it really clear what it is and where and when you're supposed to show up. So this is the rewritten one, and they do this experimental design to test the effectiveness. So notice first They label it as this is a court appearance ticket, meaning you are expected to appear in court. That was unclear from the original. They then, up top, towards the top, they say you are to show up. Where are you? What time and what day are you supposed to show up? And then finally, they tell you where are you supposed to show up, towards the front. All of that is the key information that you want obvious and noticeable. And by rewriting it in this way, they increased showing up at court by 12%. So they made people 12% more likely to show up to court, estimated reducing failures to appear and the downstream consequences of that by 30,000 summons, 30,000 defendants. But the point here is make key info obvious and noticeable. I'll show you at the end how Taylor did this, who just introduced me, how she did this in the email solicitation to sign up for this webinar. Big picture, make key info obvious and noticeable. So when I write emails or when I write documents, I make sure that a skimmer will know exactly what the point of this communication is immediately. Could be the first sentence, could be the title, could be the first paragraph, could be the subject line. Finally, make the response easy. This is the last one. I'm going to show a study that I did with Jessica Lasky-Fink, my co-author on a lot of this work, and Peter Bergman. And this was done in Washington, D.C. public schools with 7,000 middle and high school families. So there's this intervention where you use a teacher's grade book. Like teachers keep track of whether a kid turns in their homework or not. So the teacher actually interacts with this grade book. And you use the grade book that they already keep updated to automatically push out to parents whether the kid turned in their homework, or excuse me, specifically did not turn in their homework, whether a kid skipped a specific class, or whether a kid's grade fell from passing to failing. So this critical threshold from passing to failing. It does not require additional work from teachers. It just requires that teachers keep it updated and then it automatically pushes it out. And what we did in DC was we texted all 7,000 families and we said, we're offering this free service. Would you like it? And in one condition, which is the way it was typically rolled out at the time, we said, you can enroll by logging in at this website, but you're going to have to call your school first to figure out what your account info is. Okay, so we can give you all this information about your school, but you're going to have to call your school first, and then you're going to have to log in. So there's a bunch of steps required. And then in a simplified version, we said, you can get this. All you need to do is text back start. In both of these conditions, they need to actively opt in. But the first one, the standard one, requires a lot of additional friction and steps. What we did in the second one is we just simplified it. So I want you to, if we were in person or I knew how to use Zoom better, I would actually enter in the chat, if there is a chat. It doesn't look like there is. What percent of families do you think sign up in the standard opt-in? And then what percent do you think sign up in the simplified? Or put differently, how much more effective is the simplified relative to the standard? So take a second and do that. And then I'm going to show you. And we'll start with the standard opt-in. You got to call your school to get the contact info. Then you got to log in and figure out somewhere on that website how to sign up for this offering. And then there's a control group. Less than 1% of families end up enrolling in the standard. And now if you're a leader, you're thinking, this is just a useless tool. Nobody cares about it. Nobody wants it. It's not valuable. Now, when you simplify it, what percent sign up? And so 11% of parents sign up. Now you might think 11% is not a lot. It's probably less than you predicted. That's fine. But it is 10 times more than signed up in the standard way it was rolled out. By reducing friction, by just making it easy to take the action, we increased by 1,000% the number of families who want this information who enroll in it. The problem for me with this condition is that these are the parents of the best performing kids. And I am most interested in helping the students who need the most, though it's important to give information and help all parents and all kids. So we create one more condition to reduce friction even more. And instead of having them actively opt in, we have them actively opt out. And we say, you are automatically enrolled in this. If you'd like to not be enrolled, text stop to opt out. So that is like the most extreme version of making it easy to do the response we want. You don't even have to respond, right? And you could, whatever you are predicting is probably right. 95% of parents stay enrolled in the opt out. But you might think, which I think is totally sensible, which is why I separated it out. You might think that failing to opt out is not taking the response. And so I think even just comparing standard versus simplified, the going from 1% to 11%, just reducing the number of steps required to take the action increased by a factor of 10, the percent of parents who enroll. But then you do it again, you increase by a factor of 10 again by just changing the default. So the point, again, and to back out of this, use fewer words, decrease reading level, direct attention with formatting. And remember, there's a downside to highlighting or bolding some things, is that skimmers will think that you are a benevolent, effective communicator. And so they will think that you are only highlighting and bolding the important stuff. And so it will decrease their likelihood of reading other things. Make the key information obvious and noticeable. Again, the vast majority of people go as quickly as they possibly can through email, including this group, as we saw in that survey. So make the information obvious and noticeable, the key information. And then make the response easy as possible, whatever the minimum response is. I actually spend a lot of time when I edit my communications to people, trying to reduce words, reduce reading level, and I highlight the key question, and I use the subject line to make sure that the key objective is clear, and then to make the response easy. I actually put a lot of work into how do I minimize the number of things you need to do to respond. So instead of what do you think, I say, does it sound okay if I do X? Yes or no? You know, turning it into a binary yes, no, instead of what do you think makes the response easier for the person on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to show how these principles got applied to this session. The exec ed program promotes these kinds of talks to their communications list. And this was the email that they developed that Taylor was going to send out. And Taylor is the one who introduced me. And so this is the email. It's a perfectly fine email. It's written at a college sophomore reading level though. So, but this is the Harvard Kennedy School exec ed list. So you all are highly literate. And so we write that way. And it's 66 words, but I did not edit it at all. I just handed Taylor the list of principles. And I said, can you please revise this email? So applying these principles. So this is her revised version. So one, you'll notice principle one, use fewer words. She cut words by 30% from 66 to 46. Decrease reading level. She moved it from college sophomore to 7 points to basically 7th grade reading level. Direct attention with formatting. See, the science of corresponding with busy people is bolded here. And then a second paragraph, which she spaced out, reinforcing the purpose of the communication. Make the purpose obvious, she did, and then make response easy. So in addition to registering here, she added 2 links in here to make it easier to respond. And now we then ran a randomized experiment. Not half of you, because you guys are attending, the majority of you actually got the second improved checklist because you're here. But half of the list got the first one, the other half of the list got the second one. And the second one was 95% more effective. Meaning almost for every one person who signed up in the original, 2 people signed up in the revised version. And this was not, Taylor and I hadn't even talked about the session. I just gave her the checklist and said, can you apply this and let's see how it works? Almost doubled response rates. So the big principles: use fewer words, decrease reading level, direct attention with formatting, make key info obvious and noticeable for a skimmer, make response as easy as possible. Those are the 5 principles of effective communication. I lead a program called Behavioral Insights in Public Policy in the exec ed program. It's online this year. It's over a 2-week period, about half time during a 2-week period. it covers this material, but lots more on the science of behavior change, the behavioral economics and behavioral insights. And this material is basically pulling a bunch of that, focusing just on communication, but that's much broader in its implications. Taylor will probably talk about that in a moment. And as I said, Jessica and I are working on a book on this to be useful for people who communicate, which is everybody. We're all communicators. And so if you have any great examples or terrible examples, please email me. I love this topic, and I love being able to help leaders and everyone become more effective at communicating. With that, I think, Taylor, I pass to you. Thank you, guys. We're still going for 20 minutes of your Q&A, but
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Todd. We are going to pivot now to our Q&A. This is how it's going to work. We will alternate between live questions and questions that we've received via the Q&A function. If you are using the hand raise function to ask your question live, we will call your name and unmute you. Please accept the unmuting request. If you do not accept the request within a few seconds, we will move on as we anticipate a lot of questions. So I'll ask you to go ahead now and raise your hand, and we will start with live questions, and then we'll pivot to the Q&A function. And again, ask that you unmute, accept the unmute promptly, otherwise we will move on. So let's start with Sarah Schnapp. Go ahead and unmute and ask the question.
Thanks, Todd. This was a great presentation. I was thinking about your principles for effective communication in relationship to public health guidance that's been put out during the pandemic for businesses, schools. It's complex. There's a ton of PDFs. Where have you seen public health shine in terms of communication during the pandemic?
Thank you for your question, your comment about the material. I hope it's useful. 2, if you have good examples or terrible examples, you have my email. Send them, please. 3, so one of the, and then now directly answering your question, one of the things ways that this can be easily misunderstood is, what if you have a lot of actual content you need to convey? And this is often the case for public health communications. You can still reduce words, decrease reading level, make it easy for skimmers, et cetera. And so what I've seen is the very best that I've seen on this is school districts, and I focus mostly with school districts communicating with their families, but especially early in the pandemic where the plan kept changing constantly. What ended up happening was families got backlogged on previous communications. They would catch up, and then there'd be a new one that obviated the previous communication. And so it was difficult for people to figure out what the actual plan was. And so, one, you want to make it skimmable with the headings and whatnot. But I'm thinking of a single district that I'm not going to name right now that did just a really awesome job of this, where they would send emails updating the dimension that had changed and having a link to a constantly updated document, which was like a single coherent updated document. Every communication did not need to convey every piece of information. And so it also allowed them, if you have any confusion, this is the master document. And so every communication was about, we changed the in-person schedule. See the master document for updates. And then that allowed them to, and then it's a slightly different question than the one you're asking about, because you're asking, how do you communicate complex, varied things? It's even harder when you're communicating complex, varied things and you keep changing your plan, which is not your fault. The world is rapidly changing. And so solving that second part is thinking about how the reader, the difficulty the reader has of catching up as you get a backlog of changed plans. But then on the other hand of how you convey lots of information, there is good and bad organization in writing. And if you have to convey, where do you get tested, the quarantining protocols, the contagiousness rules, the masking rules, and then treatment and care, like whatever, those are 5 different things. It's not, you could just, these, whatever your document is, whether it's a web page or a printed document or an email, you just make it clear there are 5 things below these 5 things. And then you have sections that make it easy for a skimmer to figure out what it is. I have a great example from and you guys should all send me great examples like this, but a board member of a nonprofit forwarded me an email from the board where the head of the board, the chair of the board, is a published author, a notable person, and wrote a like 4-screen long board email that had bullet points listing the items given in gift bags, and had like changes to the master documents of the governing board, and then finally at the bottom it said, we also need to schedule our next meeting. Do any of these times work for you? And obviously no one responded in the first month. And so the meeting, they had to send another email to get the meeting scheduled. I rewrote it. I don't know which content is important and which is not. I just rewrote it so there's headings. And you write an intro sentence. Below, we have a list of the gift basket. We need to schedule the meeting, and I changed the governing documents, see below. And then there's just, it's skimmable because then you have headings for each. So I don't know if that, Sarah, does that get at what you're asking about?
It does. Thanks so much.
So I'm going to take another question, our next question from the Q&A. This is from an anonymous attendee. Could it be that a shorter email works in the instances you gave in the deck? Because the target audience was already interested in the topic for discussion, so they didn't need additional details about what would be discussed. They would already want to know about the things that you're about to tell them.
Sure, but I'm cold emailing for one example. I mean, I will say abstractly that I did this for a political fundraising email for a prominent political candidate, and their team wrote their best fundraising email, and then I arbitrarily cut every other paragraph of the email, so it was hardly coherent afterwards. But instead of being 6 paragraphs, it was 3, and we increased money raised. And I don't know that the recipient, I'm the recipient of fundraising emails. I'm never eager to read them. But similarly, I'm also on boards. And if I get a cold email and someone asks me to fill out a survey, I get survey requests frequently. I'm sure you all do too. And I also am not eager to read it. And I don't. So I think no matter what, people would rather spend less time consuming whatever you're sending them than more. And if there is a lot of information, so I've done this a lot, where we write, and it could be letters, it could be emails, it could be even text messages with links, but where the core necessary information, urgent information, is the body of the communication. For more information, see the back. For more information, see below the fold. For more information, whatever. And that way you get to just sort of allow someone who's going like those opening quotes as quickly as possible through email, even quicker if it's not immediately obvious how it's useful to me.
Great. Our next question is from Ebenezer Wakina. If you could unmute yourself, jump in.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Todd. Amazing work. I think my question is mostly around how social media, what role social media plays in all of this. So I know the examples you've given are usually from emails, but in a case where you don't have the person's email address and you want to, try to get someone's attention via social media, do you have any best practices that we could learn from?
Yeah, so the research that we've done is email, text, hard copy, but the principles, the basic human cognition principles are the same. Like I would predict that holding constant the interestingness of your post, like stage 1 of any communication is, do you capture people's attention long enough for them to like decide to look at what you're doing? So like Jessica and I have this like 4-stage model where stage 1 is, given that they know it's from you and or the subject line and or whatever information they have, do you get any time? So think Twitter, when you're going down Twitter, you see who's the poster, and then you decide, am I even going to look? And so stage one is, do you get any attention? Stage two is, given the amount of initial attention they're willing to give you, do they get the point of what you're trying to say before they give up? Stage three is, can you get more time? Like, can you, are you interesting enough that they initially allotted you 3 seconds to figure out what this is about before giving up? Like, is it interesting enough that they decide, oh, I really want to figure out, I want to get into this. And then the final step, which is really what most of the psychology of persuasion and influence is, which is they fully processed what you're communicating. How motivating are you? How effective is the communication you've done? And I think that we focus, I'm a psychologist, we focus mostly in a world where we assume we have fully communicated to people. And all these steps before it precede the effectiveness of whatever the content is, which is why I think most people predict the longer messages are always better, because they have more content. But in the world, people are making these time and attention allocation decisions. So with regards to social media, my take would be that that if you can make it shorter, if you can make the reading level easier, if you can and if you can make it easy to take the action, holding constant that they're gonna want to see it, that they're gonna find it interesting, then you're gonna be more likely to get through and get that time. But I don't want to imply that, like, that a one word, like, just say act now without any context could be better than giving you, like, what are we acting upon? So I think there's these trade-offs. There's a ton of trade-offs that I assume some of the questions in the queue are going to be about, where it's like, what happens when there's a program of communication? Like, this is not your only time communicating with people. And so how do you chunk? How do you think about chunking information across a flow of information instead of this being a one-off thing? And I think social media has some of that trade-off tension too.
Great. A question in the chat from Audra around, how do you recommend sharing and promoting these principles internally? Love to do some A/B testing to show our leadership the dramatic outcomes possible with these principles applied. Any other suggestions?
Well, Taylor, you tell me. So you wrote this email with your marketing team, and then with no more guidance than my little checklist, you wrote a much more effective one. How are you going to convince your team? I'm sorry, I know you're not here. I'll keep blathering until you come up with an answer, if you'd like.
I would, our process, frankly, internally was A/B testing. And we had what Todd has up on the screen on the left-hand side is pretty stock language. I did not write that. It came from our typical Audra mentioned in her question that sometimes the communication staff are the worst offenders. I won't comment on that, but that's the stock that we have. And then to Todd's point, he just sent me a kind of 5-step checklist that I edited. It took maybe 10 minutes for me to take the one on the left and turn it into the one on the right. And then we tested it. So we have an advantage here in that we're interested in Todd's work, and it was fun to do the study. But so I don't know if, Todd, you have additional advice for people who don't have that advantage.
Well, I think everyone should be interested in my work. No, I'm just kidding. That was so I think the A/B test is a really important idea. People find it powerful, but I also think there's something worth noting about the limits of experiments, which is you can only test versions that you develop. It's not the entire space of the possible. And what typically happens in A/B tests is you have some set of content and you want to test it, like focus on effective communication versus focus on behavioral science and psychology. And so you have different text and you're A/B testing which of those is better, or a different subject line and you're testing different subject lines. And so, like, we've been working with political fundraisers in this space, thinking about if we take all their A/B tests, we may find that on average their shorter ones are more effective, but it's not a principle they would have inferred, because they were the shorter one that happened to be shorter, but it was about topic X, whereas the longer one was about topic Y. So with in direct answer to the question, it would seem do an A/B test where you are isolating this dimension. You are holding the warmth of the communication the same. You are holding the core content the same. You're just reducing reading level. You're using fewer words. You're using formatting. You're making the purpose extremely obvious. I think that's a subtle thing that you did here also, Taylor. We can't tease apart which of the elements of the edits you made are the most powerful. But the subject line of this was register for a webinar. And then this one was join us for a live webcast with Todd Rogers. Who cares who Todd Rogers is, right? Like, I just sort of like, maybe if they care about me, but like this, at least it's clear what the point of this is. And then you get in and it's super clear what we're talking about, the science, of course. So if you're gonna try and do it internally, A/B testing is awesome. Otherwise, you guys, Taylor, will send out a link to this talk, and it was only like 25 minutes of me running at full speed, clicking through this. In 17 years, when the book is done, buy the book or send it to someone.
We have time for one more quick question. Mohammed Seer, you're up next.
Yeah, hi, I hope you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So Todd, great, really interesting presentation, and also it obviously shows if you simplify the information, it's received well and you can take it on board. My question is around a lot we see today, movement of governments towards digital government. So that means communication in the social media space, etc. So in that, have you had any examples of working with, embedding this kind of principles in design systems, which typically are used by government agencies to manage consistency and unified experience of information given out through digital channels?
Can you? I have half a dozen different directions I would like to respond, but can you help me understand what is a design? Well, whatever that phrase was, I don't.
Design system. Okay, yeah, so that's typically to ensure consistency, that when you are communicating, let's say you have a portal which is through which information is going to be provided by a set of government agencies, and you want to make sure that information is provided in the same way, same style, same context. So it's easy for navigation purposes, and you're not going to 5 different portals and finding different ways as a citizen to navigate through. And that obviously is quite an important factor nowadays to ensure consistency of information. So curious to know whether you've had any experience of working with that.
Yeah, and do you know that?
Tips? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Finish.
And if you have any tips, Yeah.
Yeah. I personally, it's not that far from working with school districts of 50 or 150,000 students where they have a consistent communication theme, but not at the level of what you're describing. The behavioral insights team in the UK was started in the UK and now works in dozens or hundreds of governments around the world. Like, I think that they've done this with government communications, but not at a level of filtering all outbound information, which is sort of which I think is a really interesting, great, coherent approach. The two quick add-ons to that. One, Jessica and I have started developing or are interested in fleshing out an app that would like be an overlay on Gmail that basically would if you clicked it, it would just make it would walk you through how do we think this could be more effective at getting people to respond. It would lower reading level, cut unnecessary words, sub in lower reading level words, highlight the question, move the question, whatever, all those things. So anybody here who has expertise or interest in figuring that out, there's probably about 50 different rules we would build into it. Two, the Paperwork Reduction Act in the United States is interesting in this front. It's not exactly what you're talking about, but it basically says that you can't add any questions of citizens without being able to show that the cost of reading and answering those questions is less than the benefit to the entire society. And so it really sort of I like the way it imposes this welfare analysis on we are burdening people when we are asking them to read things and answer things. And when we are burdening citizens, we need to make sure that that burden is worth it. I don't, but not exactly where you're going, but it's close. Thanks for Mohammed. I'd love to see what something like that looks like.